In October of 2003, my life was in shambles. I had been dismissed from a position that I loved. My grandfather was dying of cancer, and I was fighting the call to be a priest. I didn't know where else to turn, so as one does, I decided to go spend a week in a monastery in Boston to get away from all my stressors. Maybe I would find God there, I thought. Maybe I would get the answers I needed and my life would miraculously turn around. I arrived at the Society of St. John the Evangelist, checked in, and settled into my room. At first, I was mesmerized by the gorgeous surroundings. The chapel built in the Romanesque style, the guest house which looked like a convent or monastery itself, something out of a monastic documentary. And I thought, surely God is here, if nowhere else. After I settled into my room, I went down to the refectory for supper. Supper was taken in silence while a monk read from a book. I was glad supper was in silence because I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to be vulnerable. I just wanted to find God. After supper, the silence continued, and it continued, and it continued all evening. No TV, no radio, no internet, and unfortunately, we didn't have iPhones then. Eventually, the silence became so deafening that I couldn't stand it anymore. And I was so miserable and so distracted by my internal noise that I don't think there was any way I was going to have an encounter with God. So after 24 hours there, I called the airline and booked a ticket home. 24 hours was all it took, and I was out of there. What I didn't realize at the time was that my noise in the silence and solitude was exactly what the silence and solitude were designed to help me hear. But I couldn't face it, and I ran. In our gospel last week, you remember I was supposed to preach then, so I had to recycle some of this. Jesus calls his disciples to come away. He calls them into solitude. He calls them into silence. I'm sure the disciples were wearied from their ministries, wearied from their own internal noises, and Jesus recognized that. What we may read is that Jesus is calling them to a vacation, but he's not calling them to that at all. The word Mark uses for a deserted place is the same word used for wilderness, the same word used for Israel's Exodus journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. And in our gospel reading today, John accomplishes the same end by using a liturgical marker to place the hearer's mind in the wilderness, in the Exodus experience. John says, "Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near." And you remember those stories. After being led out of bondage, the children of Israel find that the wilderness was anything but a vacation. It was not only a refuge from trouble, it was trouble itself, a place where Israel risked losing itself forever. Remember the children of Israel saying to Moses, "Was it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? How dare you bring us out of oppression into the unknown?" And you remember what happens. God splits the sea ahead of them. God provides sweet water for them to drink. And when they become hungry, God rains down manna from heaven. God provided. The wilderness, solitude, silence, these places are so uncomfortable because we have to wait on God to provide, and we have no control. Solitude calls us to strip away our false selves It's a return to the wilderness to learn that God provides. It is to cease measuring ourselves using another's yardstick and to see ourselves as God sees us. Thomas Merton in Thoughts in Solitude says, "When society is made up of men and women who know no interior solitude, it can no longer be held together by love. And consequently, it is held together by a violent and abusive authority. But when men and women are violently deprived of the solitude and freedom which are their due, then the society in which they live becomes putrid. It festers with servility, resentment, and hate." One only need look to social media and the news